The millionaire's mother suffered constant pain until the cleaner removed something from her head. For months, the elderly woman was treated as insane by her own family, while being slowly sabotaged inside her own home. The daughter-in-law claimed to care, but hid something beneath delicate gestures and calculated smiles. It took an attentive cleaner to reveal the truth. This wasn't illness. It was implanted cruelty. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The apartment on the 12th floor of the Villaggio building, on the most tree-lined avenue of the Upper East Side in New York, had wide windows that overlooked the canopies of ancient trees. It was the kind of place that breathed tradition and good taste, with carefully preserved period furniture and paintings that told decades of history. This was the home of Mrs. Helen Cavendish, a 75-year-old woman whose clear eyes held the firmness of someone who had weathered storms without losing her dignity. Helen had always been the type of woman who never bowed to adversity. A widow for 12 years, she had raised her son, Robert, practically on her own after her husband's sudden passing. She was the one who took over the family business, who made the difficult decisions, who kept everything running while the boy grew up. She was not a bitter woman. On the contrary, she had a sharp sense of humor and an infectious laugh that could make even the building's doorman smile when he met her in the elevator. But something had changed in recent months, something she couldn't quite explain, not even to herself. It began as a discreet, almost imperceptible sharp pain on the left side of her head. Helen thought it was fatigue, perhaps accumulated tension. After all, recent times hadn't been exactly peaceful. Robert's marriage to Patricia had brought changes she was still processing, still trying to understand. The pain, however, did not go away. Instead, it settled in like an unwelcome presence, always returning to the same spots on her scalp. Deep, circular stabs of pain that came in waves and left her dizzy. Sometimes in the middle of the afternoon, she would have to sit down and take a deep breath, waiting for the sensation to pass. Other times, she would wake up in the dead of night with her head throbbing, as if something were pressing on her skull from the inside. She tried to talk to Robert about it a few times, but conversations between mother and son had become brief, superficial, punctuated by strange silences. He always seemed to be in a hurry, always had an important call waiting, always needed to solve something urgent. And when Helen mentioned the pains, he would sigh in that way of someone hearing the same complaint for the 1000th time. "It's just your age, Mum," he would say, without looking up from his phone. "You need to relax, get more rest." But Helen knew her own body. She knew the difference between a passing discomfort and something that was truly wrong, and this was wrong. The changes in the apartment began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. Patricia had refined taste, that was undeniable. She had studied interior design in Europe, spoke 3 languages and knew exactly how a table should be, set for a formal dinner. When she married Robert 2 years ago, she seemed like the perfect daughter-in-law, polite, charming, always with a gentle smile on her lips and a kind word on the tip of her tongue. Gradually, however, her presence began to expand throughout the apartment. First, there were discreet suggestions about the decor. "That antique piece in the living room might look better in the guest room, don't you think, Mrs. Cavendish? These velvet curtains are lovely, but what about something more modern, cleaner?" Helen would agree, trying to be flexible, trying to adapt to the new times. Then came the changes in routine. Patricia had firm opinions about everything. Meal times, the type of food that should be prepared, even the air conditioner's temperature, and always with that soft, almost maternal tone of voice, as if she were caring for someone too fragile to make their own decisions. "Mrs. Cavendish, don't you think it would be better if we had dinner earlier? It's good for digestion at your age." "Mrs. Cavendish, let's replace this rug, shall we? It could cause a fall, and you know how important it is to be careful. Mrs. Cavendish, how about we keep the windows closed? The street noise might bother your head." Each suggestion was wrapped in concern, but Helen began to feel that she was losing ground in her own home. And the worst part was that Robert didn't seem to notice. He trusted his wife blindly, delegating all domestic decisions to her while he focused on his business. To him, Patricia was a blessing, someone who had finally brought order and elegance to his life. The headaches worsened precisely when Patricia's visits to Helen's room became more frequent. She would appear in the late afternoon, always with some excuse. "I brought a special tea for you to try. I came to see how you're feeling. Let me fix this pillow to make you more comfortable." And always, she would end up touching Helen's hair. At first, it seemed like a caring gesture. Patricia would run her fingers through her mother-in-law's white hair, commenting on how beautiful it was, suggesting a new cut, offering to make an appointment at the hairdresser. But there was something in the way she touched, something too insistent, too prolonged that made Helen uncomfortable. One afternoon, as Patricia was combing her hair with slow movements, Helen felt a particularly sharp pain. It was so sudden that she let out a small cry, bringing her hand to her head. "What is it, Mrs. Cavendish?" Patricia asked, her voice full of feigned concern. "My head," Helen murmured, her eyes welling up. "It hurts so much." "You've been so confused lately," Patricia said, putting the comb aside and adopting that compassionate tone she used when she wanted to appear caring. "I think we need to make an appointment with a specialist, a neurologist perhaps, or a geriatrician." "I am not confused," Helen replied with a firmness that surprised them both. "I know exactly what's happening to me. It's pain, not confusion." Patricia smiled that way that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Mrs. Cavendish, of course. But still, it would be good to run some tests, don't you think? Just to be sure. Robert is worried too." Robert wasn't worried. Robert barely noticed his mother's presence lately. He left early and came home late, consumed by meetings, business trips, and dinners with clients. When he was home, his eyes were glued to the screen of his computer or phone. Patricia had become the intermediary between mother and son, filtering conversations, translating concerns, shaping narratives. Gradually, Helen began to notice other strange details. Old photos that used to be on the living room shelf had disappeared. When she asked about them, Patricia explained that they were stored safely, that the apartment was becoming too cluttered, and that it was important to keep the spaces lighter. Objects that Helen had kept for decades, gifts from her late husband, souvenirs from trips, all were gradually replaced by modern, impersonal pieces. Minimalist vases instead of antique porcelain, abstract paintings covering family photographs, grey cushions replacing the hand-embroidered ones Helen had made with such care. She tried to protest a few times, but her complaints were always met with that condescending look from Patricia. "Mrs. Cavendish, you're clinging too much to the past. It's not healthy. We need to look forward, to the future." And whenever Helen insisted, Patricia resorted to the same argument. "Robert agrees with me. He thinks these changes will be good for you." Helen began to lose the courage to contradict. She retreated to her own quarters, spending more and more time alone in her room, trying to understand what was happening to herself and the life she knew. The pains became constant companions, and with them came something even worse: doubt. Could Patricia be right? Was she really getting confused? Was age finally taking its toll? There were days when Helen looked at her own reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman she saw there. The eyes were the same, but there was something different in her expression. A shadow of fear that shouldn't be there, a hesitation that had never been part of her personality. It was on one of those lonely afternoons that Helen decided to do something she hadn't done in months. She called her old friend Lucy, with whom she had studied as a young woman and kept in sporadic contact. The conversation was brief, but it was enough to plant a seed of clarity in the confusion that was taking over her mind. "Helen, you don't sound like yourself," Lucy said from the other end of the line. "Your voice is different, tired." "I've been having these terrible headaches," Helen confessed, feeling a strange relief in being able to speak freely. "And sometimes I think I'm going crazy, Lou. Things in my house are changing and I don't know if it's real or if I'm imagining it." There was a silence on the other end, and then Lucy asked, "Does Robert know about this?" "He's always busy, and Patricia says it's all in my head." "Patricia," Lucy repeated, and there was something in her tone that caught Helen's attention. "You don't like her, do you?" "It's not that I don't like her," Lucy replied, choosing her words carefully. It's that I don't trust her. I always found her too controlling, too concerned with having everything her way. But Robert was enchanted, and you seemed to approve of the marriage, so I kept quiet." Helen hung up a few minutes later, but the conversation continued to echo in her head. Could she not be alone in her suspicions? Was there really something wrong? Something beyond the physical pain? That night at dinner, Helen observed the couple with renewed attention. Robert ate distractedly, answering messages between bites. Patricia was impeccable as always, in a perfectly cut dress and discreet makeup. She smiled, asked polite questions about Helen's day, and seemed genuinely interested. But there was something in her eyes, something cold, calculated, that appeared for a fraction of a second when she thought. No one was looking. "Mrs. Cavendish, you've barely touched your food," Patricia observed with false concern. "Are you not feeling well?" "I don't have an appetite," Helen replied. "Is it your head again?" "It's always my head." Patricia exchanged a quick glance with Robert, one of those looks that carry silent messages between couples. "Mom," Robert finally looked up from his phone, "you need to take better care of yourself. Pat is right, you should get some tests done." "I've already had tests," Helen said with a hint of irritation. "I had them 3 months ago, nothing showed up." "Then you need to have others," Patricia intervened gently. "Sometimes things take a while to appear, and with age it's important to have constant monitoring. Robert, don't you think it would be good for your mother to have a nurse, someone who could keep an eye on her during the day?" Helen felt her blood run cold. "I don't need a nurse, I'm not an invalid." "No one is saying you are, my dear," Patricia continued, with that exaggerated patience one uses with children. "But it would be good to have someone here just to make sure everything is all right. Someone who can help care for you, keep you company." "I have Irene who comes 3 times a week to clean," Helen argued, referring to the housekeeper who had worked for the family for years. "Irene is getting old too," Patricia countered. "We need someone younger, more prepared. Leave it to me, I'll find someone qualified." Helen wanted to protest, to say she didn't want strangers in her house, but the words died in her throat. A particularly sharp pain hit the right side of her head, making her close her eyes and clench her teeth. By the time she managed to compose herself, Robert and Patricia were already discussing the details of the selection process for the new employee. She felt invisible there, in her own home, at the dining table she had presided over for decades. Later, lying in bed, Helen gently touched her scalp, searching for the source of the pain. It was always the same spots, distributed in a strange, circular pattern. When she pressed lightly, she felt something beyond the pain, a small bump, as if there was something underneath. She tried to investigate further, but the pain was too intense. Besides, the room was dark, and she no longer had the agility she once had to go looking for problems that might not even exist. Maybe Patricia and Robert were right. Maybe she really did need help, care, someone to guide her, because she could no longer guide herself. That was the most frightening part of it all, starting to believe the narrative they were building about her. The next morning, Helen woke up determined to have a normal day. She ignored the pain, took a long shower, and put on one of her favorite outfits, a blue suit that always made her feel good. She went to the kitchen and prepared a full breakfast just the way she liked it. A warm baguette, butter, apricot jam, and freshly squeezed orange juice. She was sitting at the table, savoring the moment of peace, when Patricia appeared, already dressed for the day, her hair in a flawless bun. "Good morning, Mrs. Cavendish. My, what a beautiful breakfast. But you know the doctor recommended cutting out gluten, don't you?" Helen stopped with the bread halfway to her mouth. "What doctor?" "Dr. Mendez, the cardiologist, don't you remember? He said it would be better to avoid refined carbohydrates." Helen didn't remember any recent appointment with Dr. Mendez, but she wasn't sure either. Had she gone and forgotten? Patricia took the bread from her hand with a gentle but firm gesture and replaced it with a small pot of plain yogurt. "Let's eat properly, shall we? It's for your own good." Helen ate the yogurt in silence, tasting the bitter flavor of defeat. The days that followed were a confusing sequence of small humiliations disguised as care. Patricia was always around, always watching, always correcting, and the pains continued, relentless, reminding Helen that something was deeply wrong. It was. Then that Marina arrived. The interview had been quick, organized by Patricia with the efficiency that characterized everything she did. Marina was 28, had a nursing degree, and impeccable references. She was a pretty young woman, with delicate features and expressive eyes that seemed to capture everything around her. She had grown up in Queens, in a simple but close-knit family, and needed the job to help pay for the medical school she was attending part-time. When she was introduced to Helen, Marina did something Patricia hadn't expected. She shook the elderly woman's hand firmly and looked her directly in the eye. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Cavendish. I'll do my best to make you feel comfortable with my presence here." There was something genuine in that look, something Helen hadn't seen in a long time. And in that moment, without knowing exactly why, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe things could change. Maybe someone could finally see what she had been trying to say. Maybe Marina was different. The first few weeks were a period of adjustment. Marina followed Patricia's instructions to the letter, managed Helen's medication, prepared meals according to the established diet, and kept everything organized and clean. She was efficient, quiet, almost invisible in the way she moved around the house. But she was always watching. She watched how Patricia spoke to her mother-in-law, the tone of voice she used, the way she touched Helen with a familiarity that bordered on invasive. She watched how Robert barely looked at his mother when he came home, how he accepted without question everything his wife said about the elderly woman's health. And most of all, she watched Helen. She watched how the woman tensed up whenever Patricia came near, how she avoided being alone with her daughter-in-law, how she constantly brought her hands to her head with an expression of pain that went beyond the physical. Marina had seen a lot in her life. She had grown up in a neighborhood where violence was commonplace, where people learned from an early age to read signs, to sense when something was wrong. And here in this luxury apartment with its fine china and privileged views, something was very, very wrong. She just needed to find out exactly what. Marina woke up every day at 6 in the morning. It was a habit she carried from childhood, when she had to help her mother prepare breakfast for her younger siblings before they all left for school. Even now, living alone in a small rented apartment in Astoria, her internal clock still worked with military precision. Her routine at the Cavendish apartment began at 7:30. Marina would arrive, greet the doorman who already knew her by name, go up to the 12th floor, and let herself in with the key Patricia had given her. The first task was always to check how Mrs. Cavendish had spent the night, then prepare breakfast strictly following the nutritional guidelines left by her employer. In the first few weeks, everything seemed to follow a perfect script. Patricia was organized, detail-oriented, and had lists for absolutely everything. Medication schedules, permitted and forbidden foods, recommended activities for the elderly woman. Even the ideal air conditioner temperature was specified in notes stuck to the refrigerator. But the more Marina observed, the more strange details began to accumulate. Helen was not a difficult patient. On the contrary, she was polite, thankful for every small gesture and tried not to be a bother. But there was something in her behavior that didn't match the diagnosis of mental confusion that Patricia so often mentioned. The elderly woman was lucid, articulate, had a perfect memory for past events, and could follow complex conversations without any difficulty. What she had was pain, constant, debilitating pain that made her stop in the middle of any activity and bring her hands to her head with an expression of genuine suffering. Marina, who had spent 3 years working in an emergency room before deciding to go back to school, knew pain when she saw it. And that pain was real, physical, not imaginary or psychosomatic, as Patricia insinuated. It was on a Thursday morning that Marina began to connect the dots. Helen was sitting in the living room armchair, looking out the window with that distant expression that was becoming more and more frequent. Marina approached with a cup of chamomile tea. "The tea will help you relax, Mrs. Cavendish." The elderly woman accepted the cup with a faint smile. "You are very kind, Marina. I don't know what I would do without you here." There was something in her tone, a gratitude that went beyond what was appropriate for someone just doing their job. It was as if Helen was thanking her for something bigger, something unsaid. "Are you not feeling well today?" Helen hesitated before answering. Her eyes scanned the room, as if checking if they were alone. "Marina, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. You can ask me anything you want." "Do you think I'm going crazy?" The question came so directly, so raw, that Marina needed a moment to process it. She pulled up a chair and sat opposite the elderly woman. "Why are you asking that?" "Because everyone seems to think so. Patricia keeps saying I'm confused, that I forget things, that I mix up dates. Robert repeats everything she says, and sometimes I start to believe it, you know. Sometimes I think maybe they're right and I'm wrong about my own mind." Marina looked into her eyes, those clear eyes that shone with intelligence and lucidity. "Mrs. Cavendish, do you know what day it is today?" "Thursday, September 23rd. "And can you tell me what you had for breakfast?" "Plain yogurt with granola and half a banana. Same as every day since you got here. It used to be a baguette with butter, but Patricia said the doctor told me to cut it out." "Do you remember the doctor's name?" Helen frowned, thinking. She said it was Dr. Mendez, the cardiologist, but I don't remember having any appointment with him recently. Marina nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "You don't seem confused to me, Mrs. Cavendish. You seem like someone who is in pain and is being made to believe that this pain is a sign of mental weakness." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "I knew it. I knew I wasn't imagining it. But when everyone around you says one thing, you start to doubt what you feel, what you think, what you know to be. True? Can you show me where it hurts?" Helen raised her hands and pointed to several spots on her scalp, forming almost a circle. "Here, here, and here. It's like there's something buried, you know? It's not a normal headache. It's different, punctual, deep." Marina moved closer, asking for permission with a gesture. Carefully, she began to gently palpate the indicated areas. Helen flinched with each touch, but didn't pull back. And that's when Marina felt it. Small, discreet, but noticeable bumps. They weren't natural. There was definitely something there. "Mrs. Cavendish, may I take a closer look? I need better light." They went to the bathroom where the lighting was stronger. Marina asked Helen to sit on the stool and began to examine her scalp carefully, gently parting the white strands of hair. She didn't have to look for long. There they were, small bumps strategically positioned. With extreme care, she touched one of them, and Helen let out a low moan of pain. Marina's heart raced. She had seen a lot in her life, but this was a cruelty that surpassed her understanding. "Mrs. Cavendish, do you trust me?" "I do." "Then you need to promise me you'll stay calm with what I'm about to show you. It won't be easy to see, but it's important that you know the truth." With slightly trembling hands, Marina took out her phone and turned on the flashlight. She positioned it to illuminate the spot she had touched. Then she opened the camera and zoomed in, taking a picture of what she saw. When she showed the image to Helen, the elderly woman turned pale. There, clearly visible in the magnified photograph, was a small metal object. A pin, but not an ordinary hairpin. It was something twisted, sharp, pushed into the scalp so that only one end was visible. "My God," Helen murmured, bringing a trembling hand to her mouth. "How did that get there?" Marina felt anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice calm and professional. "Mrs. Cavendish, do you remember anyone touching your hair frequently?" The question was rhetorical. They both already knew the answer. "Patricia," Helen said, her voice a mere thread. "She's always touching my hair. Says it's affection, that she wants to help me fix it, but sometimes it hurts. I complain and she says I'm too sensitive. How many of these do you think you have in there?" "I don't know, but the pain is in several places." Marina took a deep breath, making a decision. "I'm going to take them out, all of them. But I need to do it very carefully so as not to hurt you more. It will hurt a little, but it will pass. Can you bear it?" "I can," Helen replied, and there was a new determination in her voice. "Take them all out, Marina. I need to know the whole truth." The process took almost an hour. Marina worked with the precision of a surgeon, using tweezers she found in the first aid kit and a great deal of patience. Each pin removed was placed in a glass container, physical evidence of the silent torture Helen had been enduring. There were 12 in total, 12 small instruments of pain, strategically positioned to cause maximum suffering without leaving visible marks. Each one had been modified, the tips bent to penetrate the scalp and get stuck there, causing inflammation and constant pain. As she worked, Marina spoke in a low voice, both to calm Helen and to process what she was discovering. This wasn't accidental. This was planned, calculated. Someone wanted you to feel pain, but not a pain that would lead to a hospital, not a pain that could be easily diagnosed, a pain that would make it seem like you were having neurological mental problems. Why? Helen asked, tears streaming down her face. Why would someone do this to me? That's the question we need to answer. When the last pin was removed, Helen felt such immense relief that she began to cry uncontrollably. It wasn't just the end of the physical pain. It was the validation that she wasn't crazy, that her suffering was real with a concrete cause. Marina carefully cleaned each small wound with antiseptic, applied a healing ointment, and stayed there, holding the elderly woman's hand until she calmed down. "What do I do now?" Helen asked, wiping her tears. "How do I face this? How do I talk to Robert?" "Not yet," Marina said firmly. "We can't talk to anyone yet. I need more proof, more evidence. If we accuse Patricia now, she'll deny it. She'll say you're delusional. She'll use these accusations as proof that you really do have mental problems. We need to be smarter than her." "What? Do you suggest that we continue to act normally? You'll complain about the pain as you always have, but now it will be diminishing because the pins are no longer there. That will confuse Patricia. It will make her act. And in the meantime, I'll watch everything. I'll look for more evidence. I'll document every suspicious move. And what if she tries to do it again? She won't be able to, because now I'm here and I won't let her touch you." Helen squeezed Marina's hand tightly. "Why are you doing this for me? You barely know me." Marina thought of her own grandmother, who had passed away 2 years ago after suffering for months in a situation of neglect that the family only discovered too late. She thought of all the vulnerable people she had seen mistreated, exploited, silenced. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because you remind me of someone I loved very much." The two stayed there for a few more minutes, in a silence that was both heavy and comforting. Then Marina helped Helen lie down to rest and went to the kitchen where she put the pins in a plastic baggie and hid it at the bottom of her purse. Evidence. Everything would be used as evidence when the time was right. The rest of the day passed in a tense normality. Patricia arrived in the middle of the afternoon, elegant as always, carrying expensive shopping bags. She greeted Marina with a polite nod and went straight to check on her mother-in-law. "How was her day?" "Good," Marina replied, maintaining a professional tone. She complained a little about the headaches, but less than usual. She saw something in Patricia's eyes change, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked. "Less than usual?" "Yes. Maybe the medication is starting to work." Patricia was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Interesting. I'll go check on her." Marina watched her enter Helen's room and close the door behind her. She approached discreetly, standing just outside, her ears attentive. "Mrs. Cavendish, how are you feeling?" Patricia's voice sounded artificial, overly laden with concern. "Better," Marina heard Helen reply, and there was a new strength in the elderly woman's voice. "The pain has lessened today." "Really? That's good. Let me see your hair, see if everything is all right." "No need, Patricia. Marina has already taken care of me today. But I insist. It's important to check." There was a pause, and Marina could imagine the silent struggle happening inside the room. Then Helen said, with a firmness that surprised Marina herself, "I said there's no need." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Then Marina heard the sound of the door opening abruptly. She moved away quickly, pretending to be tidying the living room when Patricia came out of the room. The expression on the woman's face was one of barely contained fury, but the polite smile remained on her lips. "Marina, I need to speak with you." "In the kitchen." Marina followed her, maintaining a neutral posture. In the kitchen, Patricia turned to her with her arms crossed. "My mother-in-law is different today, more agitated, more resistant. Did something happen that I should know about?" "Not that I'm aware of. I just followed the normal routine." You didn't give her any different medicine? You didn't talk to her about anything that might have upset her? No, Mum. I just took care of her as I always do. Patricia studied her for a long moment, as if trying to read between the lines. You know, Marina, I hired you because you had excellent references, but it's important that you understand your role here. You are here to take care of my mother-in-law's physical health, not to get emotionally involved or make decisions that are not your business. Is that clear? Perfectly clear. Good, because I wouldn't want to have to look for someone else. It would be a shame to lose such a dedicated employee. The threat was clear, veiled only by a thin layer of courtesy. Marina nodded and returned to her tasks, but her heart was beating fast. Patricia was suspicious, and a suspicious person was a dangerous person. That night, after Patricia and Robert had gone to bed, Marina stayed later than usual, using the excuse of finishing some household chores. In reality, she was searching for more evidence, for clues, for anything that could strengthen the case against Patricia. It was in Robert's office that she found the first significant clue. In a drawer that wasn't locked, there were folders with financial documents. Marina was no expert in accounting, but she knew enough to recognize inconsistencies. There were bank transfers that made no sense, large withdrawals without apparent justification, recent changes to powers of attorney and legal documents. She photographed everything with her phone, being careful not to leave any traces. In the days that followed, Marina maintained constant vigilance. She watched as Patricia grew increasingly frustrated with Helen's improvement. The pain had indeed diminished significantly, and the elderly woman was returning to her old self, participating more in conversations, showing interest in things around her. Robert noticed the change and commented one night at dinner, "Mom, you're looking better, I can see it in your expression." "I'm feeling better," Helen confirmed, glancing quickly at Marina, who was serving the table. "Marina has been a blessing." Patricia said nothing, but her eyes narrowed. It was after that night that things began to escalate. Marina started noticing small attempts at sabotage. Medicines switched around, schedules altered in her notes. Little things that could seem like innocent mistakes, but which Marina knew were intentional. And then came the first direct confrontation. It was a Saturday afternoon. Robert had gone out to play golf with clients, and Patricia was at home, which was unusual. She spent most of the day circling the house watching Marina and Helen with predatory attention. Marina was in the living room, with Helen helping her with a stretching exercise recommended by the physical therapist, when Patricia appeared at the door with an expression that no longer hid its falsity. "Marina, can I speak with you in the kitchen, now?" The tone was no longer a request. It was an order. Marina helped Helen settle into the armchair and followed Patricia, who was already in the kitchen with her arms crossed and an aggressive posture. "I know what you did." The words were spoken softly, but with an intensity that made Marina mentally prepare for what was coming. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't treat me like an idiot. You took out the pins, didn't you? I placed them carefully at specific times over weeks, and you just removed them." Marina felt her blood run cold, but she maintained a neutral expression. "Ma'am, I really don't know what you're talking about. What pins?" Patricia took a step forward, invading Marina's personal space. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you can come in here, a mere employee, and interfere in matters that are none of your business. But you don't know who you're dealing with. If you have an accusation to make, perhaps we should discuss it with Mr. Robert present." The mention of her husband made Patricia take a step back, but her eyes were still full of anger. "Robert trusts me. He believes everything I say. If I tell him you're stealing, that you're taking advantage of my mother-in-law's fragility, that you're planting ideas in her head, he'll believe me, not you." "Then why don't you?" The silence that followed was revealing. Patricia couldn't accuse Marina without revealing her own crimes. It was a stalemate. "You're fired," Patricia finally said. "You don't need to come back. Tomorrow." "I'll need to hear that from Mr. Robert. He was the one who hired me. He's the one who pays me. I'm not leaving without speaking to him first." Patricia smiled, but it was a smile without any warmth. Robert will agree with me. He always does. Then we'll wait and see. Marina returned to the living room where Helen was waiting with an anxious expression. She had clearly overheard part of the argument, though she couldn't have caught all the words. "She knows," Helen murmured. "I know she knows. But we also know what she did. And now, it's a matter of who tells the story first. Are you leaving?" "Not without a fight. Not without making sure you'll be safe." Helen took Marina's hand, squeezing it tightly. "I'm so afraid of her, Marina. Afraid of what she might do. She's capable of anything." "I know, but you're not alone anymore. We're going to expose the truth together. And what if Robert doesn't believe us? Then we'll make him believe, with proof that cannot be denied." Marina stayed in the apartment until Robert returned, ignoring Patricia's furious glares. When she finally heard the front door open, she went to meet him. "Mr. Robert, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Robert looked at his wife, who was already by his side, and then back at Marina. "What happened?" Patricia stepped forward. "Marina is being disrespectful, Robert. She's meddling in family decisions and needs to be dismissed." Marina took a deep breath. "With all due respect, Mr. Robert, there are things happening in this house that you need to know about. Serious things involving your mother's health." "What kind of things?" Before Marina could answer, Helen appeared in the living room leaning against the wall. Her voice, though weak, was determined. "Robert, please, listen to Marina. Listen to what she has to say. It's about me, about what I've been through. I need you to listen to me." Robert looked at his mother, at Marina, at his wife. The confusion was evident on his face. "All right," he said finally. "Let's talk. All of us. Now." And so it was, in that tense moment in the Upper East Side apartment, with New York glittering outside through the windows, that the first crack began to appear in the perfect facade Patricia had built. Marina knew the battle was just beginning. But at least now she wasn't fighting alone. The living room, always so elegant and organized, now felt like an improvised courtroom. Robert had sat in the main armchair with the confused expression of someone just pulled from a comfortable reality to face something he couldn't fully comprehend. Patricia remained standing, controlled, but her eyes sparked with ill-disguised anger. Helen sat on the sofa, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. Marina stood near the elderly woman, in a position that was both supportive and protective. Robert looked at each of them before speaking. "Can someone please explain what is going on here?" Marina took a deep breath. She had mentally rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but now that it had arrived, words seemed insufficient to describe the gravity of what she needed to reveal. "Mr. Robert, for a few weeks, ever since I started working here, I've been noticing strange things. Your mother complained of constant headaches, pains that were dismissed as symptoms of mental confusion or neurological problems. But today, upon examining her scalp more closely, I discovered the true cause." "What cause?" Robert was impatient, still not grasping the scale of what he was about to hear. Marina opened her purse and took out the transparent plastic baggie. Inside, clearly visible, were the 12 metal pins. She placed them on the coffee table with care, as if presenting evidence in a court of law. "These objects were embedded in your mother's scalp, 12 of them, strategically positioned to cause constant pain. I removed them this morning." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert looked at the pins, then at his mother, then at his wife. Patricia didn't move, but her face had visibly paled. "This is ridiculous," she finally said, her voice trying to sound firm but coming out shaky. "Robert, this is an absurd accusation. Where did she get these objects? How do we know she didn't put them there just to create this drama?" Robert picked up one of the pins, examining it closely. It was a common office supply, but it had been modified. The ends were bent, purposefully twisted to penetrate and lodge themselves. "Mom," he said, turning to Helen, "is this true? Were these objects in your head?" Helen nodded, tears beginning to stream down her face. "They were, son. And the pain I felt was unbearable, but every time I tried to tell you, you thought it was all in my head, that I was getting confused. Patricia always found a way to make it seem like I was delusional." Mrs. Cavendish is clearly in a state of confusion. Patricia intervened quickly. What this employee did is absurd. She is manipulating your mother, Robert. She planted these objects and is now putting on this show. Can't you see? Marina remained calm, though she felt her anger rising. Mr. Robert, I have photos. I took them before removing the pins. I can show you exactly where each one was, how it was inserted into the scalp. I also documented the lesions, the inflammation around each insertion point. If you like, we can go to a doctor right now, a dermatologist or even a medical examiner, and they will confirm that these marks were not made today. These are lesions from weeks, maybe months ago. Show me the photos, Robert said, and there was a new hardness in his voice. Marina opened her phone and began to show the images, one by one. Robert looked on with growing horror, zooming in on each photo, observing the details. They were disturbing images. They clearly showed metal objects partially inserted under the skin, surrounded by signs of chronic inflammation. Patricia moved closer, trying to see the photos over her husband's shoulder. Robert, darling, you can't believe this. These photos could have been manipulated. It could be anything. This woman could have hurt your mother on purpose just to create this evidence. If I had hurt Mrs. Cavendish on purpose, Marina replied coolly, there wouldn't just be these old lesions. There would also be recent marks from removal, and a doctor can easily differentiate between recent intentional trauma and chronic inflammation caused by a foreign body. Helen finally found the strength to speak. Son, I know it's hard to believe. It took me a long time to understand what was happening myself. But Patricia has been touching my hair for months, always with excuses, always saying it was to help me, to take care of me. And every time she did, a new pain would start later. But when I complained, she said I was imagining things, that it was a neurological problem, that I needed stronger medication. This is senile delusion, Patricia said, but her voice was losing its firmness. Robert, your mother, is not well, you know that. The doctors themselves said so. What doctors? Marina asked. Because I checked. Mrs. Cavendish has not had any appointments with a neurologist or geriatrician in the last 6 months. The only doctors she saw were her routine cardiologist and a general practitioner, and none of them diagnosed mental confusion or dementia. You don't have access to that information. Patricia shot back, desperate now. How dare you investigate this family's private life? Marina looked directly at Robert. Mr. Robert, with all due respect, someone had to investigate, because your mother was suffering and no one was paying attention. But that's not all I found. What else? Marina hesitated. She was about to cross a line from which there was no return, but looking at Helen, at this woman who had been systematically tortured in her own home, she knew she couldn't back down. I found financial irregularities, documents that were altered, powers of attorney giving Mrs. Patricia broad control over your mother's finances, significant bank transfers that have no clear justification. You broke into my office? Robert stood up, his voice rising. You went through my personal documents? I did what was necessary to protect my patient, because I realized it wasn't just a matter of physical health. There was a pattern of control, of manipulation, of isolation. Your mother was being systematically pushed away from you, discredited, turned into an inconvenient figure who could be easily removed or institutionalized. Enough, Patricia shouted, completely losing her composure. Enough! Robert, are you going to believe this intruder, this random employee, or are you going to believe me, your wife? Robert was visibly shaken, running his hands over his face, trying to process everything. I need to see those documents, now. They went to the office, all, together, in a tense procession down the hall. Marina showed him exactly where she had found the folders, and Robert began to examine each paper with growing attention. What he saw made him turn paler and paler. There were indeed irregularities. Dated and signed powers of attorney he didn't remember authorizing. Transfers to accounts he didn't know existed. Subtle changes to wills and legal documents that benefited Patricia in ways he had never discussed or approved. Patricia, what is this? His voice came out low, dangerously controlled. She tried to maintain her composure, but she was clearly cornered. They're just precautions, Robert. With your mother becoming more and more unstable, I needed to ensure everything was in order, that there wouldn't be legal or financial problems if she got worse. But you did this without consulting me, without my knowledge. Because you were always so busy, always traveling, always in meetings, someone had to make these decisions. These were not decisions for you to make alone. Patricia changed tactics, her voice becoming softer, almost seductive. Darling, everything I did was for us, for our future. Your mother is getting older. It's getting difficult. Eventually, she'll need specialized care, maybe institutionalization. I was just preparing for that eventuality. Preparing or provoking, Marina said, unable to restrain herself. You created this narrative of mental instability. You caused intentional physical pain to reinforce that story. You isolated Mrs. Cavendish, discredited her complaints, made her doubt her own sanity, all to have total control over her and the family's resources. Shut up, Patricia snarled, all pretense of gentleness gone. You don't know anything. You're a nobody here. I'm the only person who had the courage to see the truth, and now Mr. Robert is seeing it too. Robert turned to his wife, and there was something new in his eyes. Disappointment, anger, disillusionment. Pat, tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't do this to my mother. Patricia stared at him for a long moment, and then, to everyone's surprise, she laughed. A joyless, bitter laugh. You want the truth, Robert? The truth is your mother has always been a burden. Ever since we got married, she's been in the way, always with that superior air, as if I was never good enough for you, always meddling, always with an opinion on everything. I just wanted what was ours, what should have been ours. You hurt her, Robert said, incredulous. You tortured my mother. I gave her what she deserved, a taste of what it's like to be invisible, to be disregarded, to be treated like a nuisance. The silence that followed was absolute. Helen was crying silently, with Marina supporting her. Robert seemed unable to process that the woman with whom he had shared his life for the past 2 years was capable of such cruelty. Get out, he finally said, his voice barely audible. Get out of my house now. This is my house too. Not anymore. I want you out of here today, now. You'll regret this, Robert. I know things. I have documents, information that could ruin you if I wanted. Then do your worst. But you won't spend another minute under the same roof as my mother. Patricia looked around, perhaps hoping to see a sign of weakness, a crack where she could sink her claws in again. But she found only determination. With a sharp movement, she grabbed her purse and left the office, her high heels echoing down the hallway. They heard the bedroom door slam shut, then the sounds of drawers being opened, clothes being thrown around. Marina approached Robert carefully. Mr. Robert, I think it's best to call the police. This isn't just a family matter. These are crimes, assault, fraud, forgery. It needs to be officially reported. He nodded, still in shock, and picked up his phone to make the call. While he spoke with the authorities, Marina took Helen back to her room, helping her to lie down. It's over, Mrs. Cavendish. You're safe now. I never thought she could be so, Helen's voice broke. So cruel. I knew she didn't like me, but to think she planned all this, that she caused pain on purpose. Some people are masters at hiding who they really are, but the mask always falls eventually. They stayed there in silence, listening to the sounds of Patricia packing in the other room. After some time, she walked down the hall, dragging 2 large suitcases. She paused at the door of Helen's room for a moment. You won this time, she said, looking at her mother-in-law. But this isn't over. I have lawyers. I have resources. I will make your lives a living hell. You already did, Helen replied with surprising calm. But you have no more power over me, not anymore. Patricia left, slamming the door. They heard the elevator descend, then silence. Robert appeared at the bedroom door, shattered. Mum, I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have listened to you. You were blinded by love, son. It happens. The important thing is that now you see the truth. He approached, kneeling beside the bed and taking his mother's hand. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix everything. I promise. Helen stroked her son's face as she did when he was a child. I know you will, because now you're paying attention. You're truly present. The police arrived about half an hour later. 2 investigators listened to Robert's account, examined the evidence Marina had collected, and photographed the marks on Helen's scalp that were still visible. One of the officers was an older woman with a stern but kind expression. "Unfortunately, we see cases like this more often than we'd like," she told Helen. "Elderly people being mistreated, exploited by those close to them. You were lucky to have someone observant enough to notice and act." "It was thanks to Marina," Helen said, looking at the young woman with immense gratitude. "She saved my life. I just did what was right." The investigators explained they would open a full inquiry. Patricia would be subpoenaed for questioning. The financial irregularities would be investigated. There was enough material for several formal charges. After they left, taking the pins as evidence and a copy of all relevant documents, the apartment finally began to breathe again. It was as if a weight had been lifted from the air. Marina made tea for Helen and Robert, and the three of them sat in the living room, processing everything that had happened. "How did you know?" Robert asked Marina. "How did you realize something was wrong?" "Experience," Marina replied, "and intuition. I worked for a long time in situations where people didn't say what was really happening. I learned to read between the lines, to pay attention to what wasn't said. Your mother was screaming in silence. She just needed someone who was willing to listen." "I didn't listen," Robert said, guilt evident in his voice. "I was so focused on business, so confident that Pat was taking care of everything. I outsourced my responsibility as a son. You're not the first, and you won't be the last to fall into a trap like that. Manipulative people are very good at what they do. They build trust, create dependency, isolate their victims. It's a gradual process that happens without you even noticing. But now I know. Now I'll be vigilant." Helen touched her son's arm. "The important thing is that we're together again, for real. I don't want you to carry guilt, Robert. I want us to move forward, stronger, more united." "We will, Mum, I promise." The days that followed were ones of adjustment and recovery. Robert took a week off from work to be with his mother. They talked about many things that had been left unsaid for years. He discovered how much he had distanced himself, how much he had let his work and marriage consume all his attention. Helen, for her part, gradually returned to being herself. With the physical pain subsiding, her strong, vibrant personality began to re-emerge. She started tending to the plants on the balcony again, something Patricia had forbidden, saying it was dangerous. She started cooking occasionally, preparing the dishes Robert loved as a child. She started to laugh again, genuinely. Marina continued to work there, but the dynamic had completely changed. It was no longer an employer-employee relationship. It was almost familial. Helen insisted she have dinner with them every night. Robert began asking for her advice on how to better care for his mother, how to be more present. But not everything was resolved. Patricia had indeed hired lawyers, and good ones. Counter-accusations began to surface, attempts to discredit Marina, insinuations that she had manipulated Helen to gain access to the family's resources. They had to hire lawyers too, prepare a defense, gather even more evidence. The process would be long and draining. One afternoon, Marina was on the balcony with Helen watering the plants when the elderly woman said, "You know this is going to get ugly, don't you? Patricia won't give up easily." "I know, but I also know we have the truth on our side, and in the end, the truth prevails." "It doesn't always prevail in time to make a difference." Marina stopped what she was doing and looked at Helen. "Are you afraid?" "I am. Afraid of what else she might do, what she might make up. She's smart, calculating. She knows how to twist things in her favor. But you're not alone this time. You have me, you have Robert. You have concrete evidence. She can try to distort the narrative, but the facts are clear. I hope you're right." "I am, because I've seen worse cases, and the truth always finds a way." They stood there in silence for a moment, enjoying the breeze from the street, the distant sound of New York traffic, the normality of an ordinary afternoon. "You know, Marina," Helen said after a while, "I spent months feeling crazy, doubting myself, thinking I was losing my mind. And now I realize that was exactly her goal, to make me believe I was the problem, that I was weak, confused, a burden. It's frightening how subtle manipulation can be. That's why it works so well. When a person starts to doubt their own reality, they become vulnerable to all sorts of control. How did you learn all this? About manipulation, about the warning signs? Life teaches you, not always gently, but it teaches you. Helen didn't press. She sensed that Marina carried her own scars, her own stories, and she respected her silence about the past. "Thank you," Helen said simply, "for everything." "You don't need to thank me. It's my job." "No, it's more than that. You had no obligation to get involved like this, to risk your job, maybe even your safety, for an old woman you had just met." Marina smiled. "Maybe. But some things you do not because you have to, but because it's right, and letting you suffer was not an option for me." The sun was setting over New York, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was one of those rare moments of urban beauty when the city seemed to pause for an instant before plunging into the night. "Everything will be all right," Marina said, more to herself than to Helen. "It has to be." But they both knew the battle was far from over. Patricia was not the type to accept defeat easily, and the more cornered she felt, the more dangerous she would become. What neither of them imagined was just how far she would be willing to go to reclaim what she considered hers. Her revenge would come. It was only a matter of time. The legal process dragged on for 3 intense months. Patricia not only hired the best lawyer's money, could buy, but also launched a systematic smear campaign against everyone involved. Her tactics were sophisticated and cruel. She started by planting stories in her social circles, subtle insinuations about Helen's supposed senility, about the greed of an opportunistic employee, about an easily manipulated son. Marina woke up each day knowing it would be difficult, but she never imagined how much. Anonymous accusations against her began to appear on healthcare professional review sites. Social media messages from people she didn't even know questioned her ethics, her competence. She was summoned to give statements at 3 different police precincts, always about variations of the same fabricated story, that she had taken advantage of a vulnerable elderly woman to extort money. Every accusation was refuted, every claim disproven by evidence, but the toll was immense. Marina had to hire her own lawyer, spending savings she had set aside for medical school. She had to face suspicious looks from neighbors who read the lies online. She had to explain to her own family what was happening, seeing the worry on her mother's face each time new stories emerged. But she did not give up. Helen also suffered. She had to be examined by 3 different experts, all appointed by the court, to assess her mental sanity. Each examination was a renewed humiliation, with questions about her ability to care for herself, memory tests, psychiatric evaluations, as if she, the victim, had to prove she wasn't crazy to have the right to have been mistreated. The scars on her scalp were photographed dozens of times. The pins were analyzed by forensic specialists. Every technical detail of the torture she endured was dissected and documented, transforming her pain into cold data for the case file. Robert tried to stay strong, but guilt consumed him. His business suffered because he couldn't concentrate. He lost important clients because he was always running from one place to another, dealing with legal matters. Some friends drifted away, while others were clearly divided on who to believe, especially since Patricia was persuasive and maintained the posture of an unjustly wronged victim. There were nights when Robert stayed up late, questioning every decision he had made, every sign he had ignored. How could he have been so blind? How did he allow his wife to turn his own mother's life into a hell? The questions had no satisfactory answers, only the weight of regret. It was during one of these difficult nights, about 2 months after Patricia had left, that the apartment received an unexpected visitor. Marina was organizing some documents in the living room when the doorbell rang. It was late, almost 11 at night. Over the intercom, a female voice she didn't recognize asked to speak with Robert urgently. She said she had important information about the Patricia case. Robert, suspicious but curious, buzzed her in. Minutes later, a woman of about 40 entered the apartment. She was elegant, but there was a weariness in her expression, as if she had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time. "My name is Valerie Martins," she introduced herself. "I was married to Patricia's father for 5 years. She was my stepdaughter." Robert gestured to the sofa, and they all sat down. There was tension in the air, a sense that something important was about to be revealed. "What do you want to tell us?" Robert asked. Valerie took a deep breath before she began. "When I read about your case in the papers, about the accusations against Patricia, I wasn't surprised. I was only surprised it took so long. For someone to find out who she really is. Patricia isn't just manipulative, she's dangerous. And she's done this before." "What do you mean?" Marina leaned forward, attentive. "My ex-husband, her father, died 8 years ago. At the time, everyone thought it was a sudden heart problem. But before he passed away, he spent months complaining of strange pains, mental confusion, episodes of disorientation. The doctors couldn't find a cause. After he was gone, Patricia inherited a considerable fortune. That's when our marriage, which was already bad, ended completely." "And you suspect she had something to do with it?" "More than suspect, I'm certain. Years later, when I was sorting through things that had been stored away, I found a diary she kept. It read like a manual on manipulation. It described in detail how she was administering small doses of medication to her father, how she was creating stressful situations, how she was building a narrative of his mental instability to gain control over his finances. "Why did you never report it?" Robert was pale. "Because I didn't have enough proof. It was just a diary which she could claim was fiction, and because, honestly, I was scared. Scared of what she might do to me if I confronted her. Patricia is the kind of person who doesn't accept being crossed. She destroys anyone who gets in her way." "Why are you telling us now?" "Because I can't stay silent again. Not after reading what she did to you." She looked at Helen. "And because I kept the diary, it's here." Valerie took a hardcover notebook, worn with time, from her purse. She handed it to Robert, who opened it with trembling hands. The pages were filled with a delicate, feminine handwriting. But the content was disturbing. It detailed, with clinical coldness, every step of a plan to incapacitate her father and take control of his assets. One particularly shocking entry read, "Today, I increased the dosage a little more. He's confused, scared. Perfect. The more unstable he seems, the easier it will be to convince everyone he needs a guardian, and that guardian will be me." Robert passed the diary to Marina, who read it with growing horror. Then she showed it to Helen, who couldn't get past a few pages before closing the notebook forcefully. "This is monstrous," Helen said, her voice trembling. "It's who she is," Valerie replied sadly. "And if it weren't for you having the courage to report her, she would have kept doing this to other people. When I saw the news, I realized I had to act. This diary can be used as evidence of a pattern of behavior. It shows this wasn't an isolated incident, but a systematic way of operating." "Are you willing to testify?" Marina asked. "I am. It's time for Patricia to finally pay for what she's done." Valerie's entry into the case changed everything. The defense lawyers immediately incorporated the diary as evidence. They requested an exhumation of Patricia's father's body for new toxicological tests. They were able to demonstrate a clear pattern of predatory behavior that immensely strengthened the case against her. Patricia, upon discovering that her stepmother had testified against her, completely lost control. She tried to intimidate Valerie, sending threatening messages that were promptly handed over to the police. Her desperate tactics only served to further strengthen the accusations against her. The trial finally took place on a rainy day in December. The courtroom was packed. Marina, Helen, and Robert sat together in the front rows. Valerie was there too, ready to testify. The other side, Patricia maintained a rigid posture, her chin held high, refusing to show any sign of weakness. The prosecutor meticulously presented the evidence: the pins, the photos of the injuries, the fraudulent financial documents, the revealing diary. Each piece fit perfectly, building an undeniable picture of systematic abuse, manipulation, and fraud. The witnesses were called one by one. Marina described her observations, the process of discovery, the removal of the objects. She spoke with clarity and conviction, unshaken by the defense attorney's attempts to discredit her. Helen testified about the suffering she endured, about how she gradually lost confidence in herself, about the constant fear she came to feel in her own home. Her voice was firm, dignified. She was no longer the fragile, confused woman Patricia had tried to create. She was a survivor. Robert spoke of his own guilt and blindness, of how he was manipulated into ignoring the clear signs that something was terribly wrong. He admitted his failings as a son, but also made it clear that this did not absolve Patricia of anything. And then it was Valerie's turn. Her testimony was devastating. She described in detail how Patricia had acted with her father, the disturbing similarities to Helen's case, the undeniable pattern of predatory behavior. When it was finally Patricia's turn to defend herself, she tried to maintain her composure. She claimed it was all a big misunderstanding, that she was only trying to care for her mother-in-law, that the evidence was circumstantial and easily explained. But when the prosecutor pressed her about the diary, about the coincidences too numerous to ignore, about the concrete physical evidence, she began to crumble. The mask of civility cracked, and for brief moments, everyone could see the real person behind it. Cold, calculating, without genuine remorse. The jury didn't need long to deliberate. 4 hours later, they returned with the verdict. Guilty on all charges: aggravated assault, fraud, forgery, attempted fraudulent incapacitation. The sentence came 2 weeks later, 8 years in prison, plus the obligation to repay all embezzled funds and pay compensation for moral damages to Helen. When the judge's gavel fell, sealing the sentence, Helen felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: justice. It wasn't joy, it wasn't revenge. It was simply the feeling that the world still had order, that the truth still mattered. Marina squeezed her hand, and the two looked at each other with mutual understanding. They had fought together and won. Life began to flow again in the Cavendish apartment. But it didn't go back to what it was before. It returned different, better in some ways, still healing in others. Helen reoccupied her space with confidence. She redecorated the house, bringing back objects Patricia had removed. Every old photo she put back on the shelf, every piece of furniture she brought back, was a piece of herself she was reclaiming. She started having friends over for afternoon tea again, started making plans, started living without fear. The headaches disappeared completely after the wounds healed, but the emotional scars took longer. She had nightmares in the first few weeks, waking up startled, thinking she heard Patricia's voice. She started therapy, something she would have previously considered unnecessary, but now recognized as essential. In one session, the therapist asked how she felt about Patricia. Helen thought for a long moment before answering. "I pity her," she finally said. "Pity for someone so empty inside that they need to destroy others to feel powerful. But I don't forgive her. To forgive would be to pretend that what she did was acceptable, and it wasn't. Some things are unforgivable, and it's okay to acknowledge that." Robert completely changed his worldview. He drastically reduced his workload, started delegating more, and prioritized quality time with his mother. He began to be truly present, not just physically but emotionally. They created new rituals: dinners together every night, with no phones at the table, weekends where they simply talked, reminisced about old stories, and built new memories. Robert discovered his mother had fascinating opinions on politics, art, and life, things he had never stopped to listen to. He also went to therapy. He needed to process the guilt, the sense of betrayal, the shock of discovering that the person he planned to spend his life with was capable of such cruelty. It took time, but he gradually learned to forgive himself, to understand that he was a victim too, in a different way. Marina continued to work for the Cavendish family, but the relationship evolved into something far beyond professional. Helen considered her like a daughter. Robert saw her as part of the family. And Marina, who had grown up used to fighting alone, learned that it was possible to accept affection, that it was possible to belong. With the money she received as a special bonus from Robert, in addition to what she saved from working, Marina was finally able to return to medical school full-time. Helen insisted on helping with tuition, arguing it was the least she could do for the person who saved her life. "You saved more than my life," Helen often said. "You saved my dignity, my sanity, my right to exist fully. I just did the right thing," Marina would always reply. But how many people do the right thing when it's hard, when it requires courage, when it can be costly? You are special, Marina, never doubt that. The case gained media attention, and Marina was invited to give talks on identifying elder abuse. She discovered she had a talent for teaching, for raising awareness. She started volunteering at a support center for victims of domestic violence, using her experience to help others recognize the signs of danger. One afternoon, about 6 months after the trial, Helen called Marina and Robert for a special conversation. There was something formal in her tone, but also a contained joy. "I've made some important changes to my documents," she began, sitting in the armchair that had returned to its place of honor in the living room. "My will now reflects who truly matters in my life. Robert, you will continue to receive what is fair and right. But Marina, I have included you as a beneficiary of a significant portion." "Mrs. Cavendish, I can't accept that," Marina protested immediately. "I didn't do anything expecting a reward." "I know. That's exactly why you deserve it. Furthermore, I have created a fund that will be used for scholarships in your name, for young people from humble backgrounds who want to study medicine or nursing, so that there can be more people like you in the world." Marina was speechless, her eyes welling up. "It's not about money," Helen continued. "It's about recognizing value, honoring kindness, ensuring that the good you have done continues to multiply. You changed the course of my life, and I want your impact to continue, even after I'm gone." The three of them sat there, in that moment of deep understanding about what family meant. It wasn't just blood ties. It was choice, it was care, it was being there when it mattered most. As the months passed, the Cavendish apartment transformed into something it had never been when Patricia lived there, a true home. There was laughter, there were healthy discussions, there was space for real emotions without fear of judgment. Helen took up painting again, a hobby she had abandoned years ago. Her paintings were surprisingly good, full of color and life. She had a small exhibition at a neighborhood cultural cafe and sold 3 canvases. The money didn't matter. What mattered was that she was creating again, expressing herself, existing beyond the role of a silent matriarch. Robert started dating again, but with a healthy caution. He learned to observe signs, to trust his own instincts, to not ignore red flags. He introduced his new partner to Helen and Marina only after several months and was relieved when they both approved. She was someone genuine, without masks, without ulterior motives. Marina was the first to notice the change in Helen one spring morning. The elderly woman was on the balcony, tending to her plants, humming softly. The sun illuminated her white hair, now grown healthy, where there had once been scars. There was peace in her expression, a lightness that hadn't been there before. "You look happy," Marina observed, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "I am," Helen confirmed, accepting the cup and smiling. "You know, I spent so much time just surviving, just enduring, that I forgot what it was like to really live. But now I remember, and it's wonderful. I'm glad I was part of this journey." "Part?" Helen laughed. "You were the architect of this journey. Without you, I'd be in a nursing home right now, over-medicated, convinced I was crazy, or worse. I don't like to think about the or worse. Neither do I, so let's think about what is. About now, about what we've achieved, about the future we have ahead of us." They stood there enjoying the coffee and the morning when Marina's phone rang. It was from the support center where she volunteered. They had a new case, an 80-year-old woman being mistreated by her son-in-law. They needed someone with experience to do the initial assessment. "I have to go," Marina said, already getting up. "Go," Helen replied. "Go save someone else, just like you saved me. It's what you do best." Marina rushed out, grabbing her purse and keys. Helen remained there, watching the young woman disappear out the door, taking with her all that energy, that determination, that unshakable sense of justice. And she smiled, because if a person like Marina existed in the world, then there was hope. Hope that evil would not win, that the vulnerable would have defenders, that the truth still mattered. The story of Helen and Marina spread, not through sensationalist news reports, but by word of mouth, among healthcare professionals, among families, among communities. It became an example that it was possible to resist, it was possible to win, it was possible to recover. Other cases began to be reported. People who had previously remained silent, who thought no one would believe them, found courage in the stories of those who had won. The ripple effect was small at first, but constant. Patricia was serving her sentence in a women's prison. According to reports, she kept to herself, refusing to participate in group activities or rehabilitation programs. She still saw herself as a victim, still blamed everyone but herself. Perhaps she would never truly understand the magnitude of what she had done. Or perhaps in some lonely moment of forced reflection, the truth would finally penetrate her defenses. But Helen didn't spend time thinking about her. She had decided that Patricia had already stolen enough months of her peace. She wouldn't steal another day. Instead, Helen focused on living, on building memories with her son, on supporting Marina on her journey, on enjoying every morning waking up without pain, without fear. On a special Sunday, she organized a lunch. She invited Robert and his girlfriend Marina and Marina's mother, whom she insisted on meeting, Valerie, who had become a close friend, and her old friend Lucy, who had been on the phone that crucial day when Helen began to realize she wasn't crazy. The table was laden with food that Helen had prepared with her own hands. The room echoed with conversations, laughter, the sound of a family built not by blood, but by choice and shared experience. In the middle of lunch, Helen stood up, lightly tapping her wine glass to get everyone's attention. "I want to make a toast," she announced, her voice strong and clear. The voice of someone who had reclaimed her own power. Everyone raised their glasses, attentive. "I toast to second chances, to the truth that prevails, to those who have the courage to see what is wrong and the strength to do something about it. I toast especially to you, Marina, who saw when no one else did, who acted when it was easier to ignore. You gave me my life back. And I toast to my son, Robert, who had the humility to admit his mistakes and the courage to start over. You two are my greatest treasures." Tears flowed freely on several faces around the table. They were not tears of sadness, but of recognition, of gratitude, of genuine love. "And I toast to myself," Helen concluded with a mischievous smile, "for having survived, for having fought even when it seemed impossible, for being here, now, whole and alive." "Cheers!" Everyone responded in unison, glasses clinking, smiles wide. It was an ending, but it was also a beginning. Helen was 76 now, but for the first time in a long time she didn't feel defined by her age. She felt defined by experience, by hard-won wisdom, by the deep understanding that life was precious precisely because it was fragile. Marina would continue her journey, becoming a doctor, saving more lives, making a difference. Robert would continue to grow, becoming not just a successful businessman, but a present son, a conscious man. And Helen would continue to live, fully, bravely, with gratitude for each day. Their story was one of pain, but also of redemption, of manipulation, but also of truth, of violence, but also of healing. And above all, it was a story about the transformative power of a single person who decides to do the right thing, even when it's difficult, even when there are risks. Because in the end, what defines our humanity is not avoiding the traps life sets for us. It's having the courage to recognize when we are in them and the determination to get out. It's being able to see the suffering of others and not turn away. It's understanding that complicit silence is almost as destructive as active violence. And sometimes, just sometimes, a single voice that refuses to be silenced can change everything. That night, after everyone had gone home, Helen stood alone on the balcony, looking at the lights of New York twinkling in the distance. She no longer felt loneliness. She felt whole. She lightly touched her scalp, where the scars were still perceptible to the touch, though invisible to the eye. She didn't see them as marks of victimization, but as reminders of survival, of strength, of a new beginning. The wind carried the scent of jasmine from the neighboring building's gardens. Somewhere in the city, Marina was probably still working, taking care of someone in need. Robert was building a new life, more conscious, more present, and Patricia was behind bars, facing the consequences of her choices. The world kept spinning, as it always had, as it always would. But for Helen, each rotation now had a renewed meaning. She had faced the worst that human nature had to offer, and she had won. Not without scars, not without pain, but she had won. And that, she thought as the wind caressed her white hair, that was all that mattered. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Helen, Marina, and Robert has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of pain, courage, and redemption, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most in this story. Was it Helen's strength, Marina's courage, Robert's transformation? Every day we bring intense stories, like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, that make us reflect on our own ability to see the suffering around us and act, because sometimes a single person paying attention can save an entire life. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you think.